Uh, uh, Welcome again to another installment of our show, Diaspora Home and Abroad. And today we are focusing on US politics, and specifically we're going to talk about what's happening right now, especially around the Joe Biden's agenda, the agenda that the Democrats ran on. As you all know, there are issues, especially right now. As we record this show, Congress is still discussing its agenda in terms of building back better, but definitely there are issues. And today I've invited two experts to speak to us about what that means when it comes to his agenda, especially going into the midterms in next year, and also the 2024 elections. Today, it's my privilege to host Professor David Monda. Monda is a professor. He teaches international history at City University in New York. And I'm also joined today by Osiro. Osiro is, as you know, is an author. In fact, Osiro, I don't know when your book, man, on
Colimo.
Oh yeah, when is it coming out? We need to.
I am finished. You know, that book has been a labor of love, but hopefully this month. I got the final draft just this past week. You know, I have been going through it with a fine-tooth comb just because of the, you know, I just want to do my due diligence, and I want to make sure that whatever I say is corroborated with information in the public domain. So that's what I'm doing right now. But as far as the book, it's written, it is done. I'm just crossing my I's and dotting my T's. Or is it crossing my T's and dotting my I's? So by the end of this month, it should be out.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, so Washington Osiro is an author. He lives in the Bay Area in California. But he's joining us from Atlanta. I think he's in Atlanta on some work-related mission, and he just told us that he's going to be there for some time now. Yes. So we, one of these days, we're going to visit him in Atlanta and see what is there. So, gentlemen, welcome to our show again. It's my privilege to host you. It's been a year. It's been a tough year, especially because of COVID-19. But here we are again, and I'm happy that we can reconnect and discuss some of these issues. So, Professor, you know, I have a soft spot for you because you're a teacher and you always have a way of laying the table for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Much respect. Yes.
Thank you, sir. So, Professor, we like I said, today we are discussing Biden's agenda going into the midterms and of course the 2024 elections. As we speak right now, like I said again, there seems to be some kind of a standoff in Congress concerning his big bill that is supposed to build back better. A bill that is supposed to fulfill his agenda. Can you just, you know, bring our viewers up to date on what's going on?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for having me on your show. And what's really happening is several things. There's actually two major bills that are being discussed in Congress right now. One is the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and the other is the budget spending bill of $3.5 trillion. So the tension here is Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who are the majority and minority leaders in both the Senate and the House, are trying to push these two bills along in Congress at the same time. Now, the problem is that President Biden, who's a Democrat, the Democrats who have a majority in the Senate and a majority in the House are facing opposition from within the Democratic Party. And I'll explain that in this way. In terms of the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, they have enough votes. They would just need a few Republican votes to pass the infrastructure bill. but that's really not so contentious because even Republicans like infrastructure. Every district, people love more infrastructure for roads, railways, and so on. The tension from the Democrats, who are divided in the Democratic Party between the moderates and the progressives, is about how do you bring the extra big chunk of money, the second bill, the $3.5 trillion, and reconcile it with the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. So how do you fuse the budget spending bill with the infrastructure bill? And that is where the heat is coming. So the Democrats, the progressives, the AOCs, the Cortezes of this world are on one side, and and Biden and the more moderates are on the other. The Chuck Schumers, the Nancy Pelosi's are on the other side, and the Democrats are within themselves are really fighting because the progressives want to bring the bigger budget together with the $3.5 trillion budget in together with the $1 trillion budget and have them all be passed together. However, Pelosi and more of the moderate Democrats are arguing that why don't we just pass the $1 trillion infrastructure bill separately, and that's really the big fight within the Democratic Party. If I may also add just really quickly, part of the tension, Chris, around this bill is the Democrats are really pushing to get as much done right now as possible because the Democrats control the House of Representatives, the Democrats control the Senate, and the Democrats control the White House. So in the context of budgeting, they actually don't need your traditional 2/3 majority to get bills passed. They can actually pass bills with a simple majority. But the problem is within the Democratic Party. There's different wings of the party, and they have very different priorities. And this is a really big deal for Biden, because if he's not able to pass his bills, this will be a big, big issue, because if the Democrats lose the elections in 2022, they may not control the House and or the Senate, and that will be a big issue.
That's very true. In fact, Washington.
Yes.
Professor has just opened the door into my next question, which is, what will it mean? Let's hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Imagine that the wrangles between the Democratic Party persist and they don't get anything done as the year turns. What will that mean to Biden's agenda?
Oh man, again, Chris, thank you very much for reigniting the show. And I think just to dig right into the question, I think the saying what, one day in politics is a lifetime, or what, in this case, the elections are 12 months away. So, I mean, there are definite red flags, warning signs for the Democratic Party for Biden, but I also believe that 12 months is a lifetime. So a lot can happen between now and then. To Professor Manda's point, the Democrats are a big tent. They have all the different wings of the party, and they have all these different ways in which they want to govern. So like the professor says, the issue, the tension, the stumbling block is within the party itself. My guess is that, and again, I'm the eternal optimist. My guess is that, and I also have a lot of faith in Nancy Pelosi's ability to get the votes and basically shuttle along legislation. My hope is that they will be able to find a happy medium where they get the infrastructure, which would be a big win, but also start looking at the details of the big budget. I mean, let me back up here. The issue, as I see it, is that the discussion has been very, very almost abstract. We're talking $1 trillion, $3.5 trillion, and that's a lot of money. And that's what I know the Republicans are pushing back against the $3.5 trillion because it's a lot of money. And all of a sudden they found religion specific to budget deficits, while in the last, when President Trump was in office, they didn't care too much about spending money. But the point is this: if the Democrats can have a debate that basically breaks down the $3.5 trillion into bread and butter issues, whether it's healthcare, whether it's whether it's college education, whether it's, I think one of the expression I had the other day was, whether it's eyeglasses for grandma. If the Democrats can have a debate specific to the budget on bread and butter issues, and all of a sudden that $3.5 trillion is directly tied into what what improves the lives of people, then I think they have a chance. But if they continue to talk about the top level amount, which is $3.5 trillion, then I think they're going to have a difficult time either getting any buy-in from the Republicans, or even bringing the different wings of the Democratic Party together to agree on a way forward on the budget issue. But as far as like the professor said, the $1 trillion infrastructure deal, that seems to be bipartisan in support, and it can go along. The question is, will the progressives, the moderates in the Democratic Party allow the two bills to be linked and then moved ahead? If that happens, if that doesn't happen, then I think 2022 is going to be very interesting. But again, I circle back to where I started, which is a year in a lifetime in a political life is a year is a lifetime in politics. So I'm going to hold off making predictions what's going to happen next year with the midterm elections around the corner until I see how things play out.
And Chris, if could I just
please
jump in on something Osiro just said there.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
One of the interesting is that why are the Republicans in opposition to this 3.5 to the budget spending bill, the $3.5 trillion of spending? One is they're saying it's too much money, right? So they accuse the Democrats of tax and spending, taxing the people and spending.
Yeah.
But the bigger issue is they're very concerned because who's going to make up the difference in the monies to be raised to raise the 3.5 trillion? The Democrats plan to tax the rich. And this is one of the areas that's really frustrated the Republicans, because they're saying that is not the way to grow the economy. Now, the other important thing to think about, Chris, on this issue of the budgeting is really interesting, because what the division within the Democratic Party is a lot about numbers, 1 trillion versus 3.5 trillion, but it's really about how do we understand infrastructure. So the more progressive Democrats are saying infrastructure really cannot be just roads, railways, bridges, and subways, and so on, and harbors, right? The progressive wing of the Democrats are saying we need to think of infrastructure holistically and add more money to infrastructure, meaning we have to start thinking of daycare for working poor. We need to start thinking about more support for after school programs. We also need to have more money for climate change. And this is an interesting dynamic when we think about Kenya, because earlier this year in Kenya, we had the Blue Economy Conference, which was very big around climate change issues. Now, this budget, this extra $3.5 trillion, a lot of that money will really go towards issues of climate change. Biden's going to be discussing this in the upcoming COP26 conference in Glasgow. And a large portion of this budget will, the 3.5 trillion, will go towards ameliorating climate change. How does that tie Kenya in? We are the headquarters of the United Nations Environmental Program. So when we think think of these environmental issues, when we're thinking about the US budget, it's not just the United States. If Biden doesn't get this budget through, UNEP, a lot of UN programs around climate change will also be incapacitated, and that will be a problem. And then lastly, what's related to Kenya and these bills is immigration, right? Because a portion of the 3.5 trillion, a big issue around that is with the progressives is they want comprehensive immigration reform. We know we have hundreds of thousands of Kenyans in this country without papers. Now, this is the big debate because the Republicans do not want to budge on immigration. They feel if Biden passes this 3.5 trillion, we get comprehensive immigration reform, what's going to happen? Most of the immigrants who might become citizens will probably in 2022, 2024 vote Democrat. That's a problem for the Republican Party. But immigration is always a hot button issue. So there's a lot of very moving parts within these bills. Yes, it's a lot about spending, but there's also bigger issues within the bills around immigration, around climate change, and fundamentally about how we understand issues of infrastructure.
And that ties not only climate change and immigration, but now let's just talk the overall US economy. I mean, I know that the stock market has been on a tear, but that is not the economy. The economy is, you know, the small businesses that employ really low-skilled workers, but that is a bulk of the people who really send their remittances back home. So all of a sudden, you know, if you start seeing a dent in the remittances that are coming from the US in particular, then how does that affect the Kenyan economy? That depends on what, the 35 billion shillings that are sent, is it every month or every quarter? But anyway, a big chunk of those monies that are remitted back to Kenya are from people who are part of the US economy. Now, if the budget, the $3.5 trillion dollars is not passed, how will that affect the economy, the US economy? Will that have an impact on the remittances? That is yet to be seen. But again, to Professor's point, and this is what you and Chris, you and I were talking about earlier on, is that yes, we want to talk about issues that are near and dear to Kenyans, especially on the domestic front, but Kenya is a part of a global village, and they're very tied into the global economy. To the extent that we understand how the issues in the global village, in the global economy affect the Kenyan economy, that will allow us to at least hedge against ameliorate their impact. And that is part of what this conversation should take into account, not just focusing on you know, the BBI or on the domestic front, but focus on Kenya as part of the larger global economy, and how do we position ourselves to take advantage, or at least to understand the impact of some of those dynamics on the local front.
Awesome, awesome. So, Professor.
Yes.
You know, in as much as now the focus is on the Democrats and their agenda right now, we barely escaped a government shutdown. And
yes.
Of course, there's still the issue of raising the ceiling in America. Let's talk briefly about the GOP politics. What kind of strategy are they using when it comes to the American politics? Because one will expect that if the government shuts down, it affects everybody. If the economy tanks, it affects every American.
So I think their strategies use a strategy Republicans have used for a long time in this country, which is let the Democrats fry in their own fat, right? Let the party just you know, let the Democratic Party cook itself in its own squabbles, right? Republicans are known historically in this country to be very focused on their goals. When they want to push an agenda, they vote as one, traditionally, whereas because of the history of this country, the Democratic Party has tended to have a very different kind of coalition of very different interests. So a lot of times when they come into power, there's usually a lot more squabbling on the Democratic side than the Republican side. If I may, for example, if you think about 2008 when Barack Obama came to power, he had a situation similar to what Joe Biden has right now. Obama controlled the White House. He was in the White House. Obama controlled the Senate, and Obama controlled the House of Representatives. But nothing was done, for example, on immigration reform because of all these different kind of divisions that we have right now. Now, specifically, since you asked me about the GOP, there's 4 broad categories of the grand old party, what we call the Republicans. You have what we call the social conservatives. Now, these would be your governor of Texas. These are people who are strong on abortion, right? Like people like Ted Cruz. They are those social conservatives. They're anti-abortion. They're very conservative on social issues. You have fiscal conservatives on the Republican side, people like Ben Sass from Nebraska. And these are conservatives who care more about being fiscally conservative. They're not so much heavy on who you marry or gay marriage or other social issues. Theirs is to be more fiscally conservative. Then you have, even within the Republicans, people like Rand Paul, the libertarians. And these are people who emphasize limited government and low taxes. Let the people live free. Let Chris do his business. Let Washington do his business. Government, get out of my business. But the other fourth interesting wing, Chris, is the right wing, right? But what do you call them? The Trumpists. This Donald Trump,
the extremists,
which has created a lot of very interesting dynamics within the party, because this wing, those are the people who are very motivated to turn out during the Republican primaries. So if you're a Republican senator or you're a Republican member of the House and you're against Trump, or they don't feel you're voting on Republican lines, it's very likely in 2022 that you will have a challenger to you trying to be nominated by the Republican Party on the Republican ticket for that election. So even on the Republican side, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of very interesting politics going on that side. But essentially, the Republicans right now, Chris, are really acting very obstructionist because they do not want $3.5 trillion spent in this funding bill. Yes, they want infrastructure. The US spends about 2.5% of GDP on infrastructure, compared to European countries, which spend about 5%, and compared to China, which spends almost twice what we spend, 8% on infrastructure. So there's a bipartisan consensus on passing the $1.1 trillion infrastructure bill. The issue is with who will be taxed to pass the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, and the dynamics of that, right? What will be added to that $3.5 trillion bill? Will it be immigration? Will it be funding for climate change? The Republicans are very much opposed to that, and opposed to ballooning the budget and increasing the budget, the budget deficit.
And I think, so again, then this is something I said at the beginning of the discussion, is if the Democrats focus on the number, the $3.5 trillion, then they're going to lose the discussion. They're going to lose the debate, because let's take as an example the senator from West Virginia, Manchin. He is basically one of the stumbling blocks within the Democratic Party for nothing else other than the fact that it is a lot. The 3.5 trillion is a lot of money, and he represents. He's a Democrat in a very conservative state, West Virginia, that went for Trump by, I don't know, 60 points. So if the debate focuses on the amount of 3.5 trillion, then the Democrats are in a lot of trouble. But if it focuses on the bread and butter issues, if we start talking about grandma's eye prescriptions, if we start talking about daycare, especially in the wake of the pandemic and how it devastated the daycare that the mostly women would take their children to. If we start talking about healthcare in general, if we start talking about college funding, then all of a sudden the discussion shifts from, we just spent what, $20 trillion in a war that we effectively lost, and we are quibbling about 3.5 trillion, and the people who we are going to tax are people who made billions during this pandemic, people like Elon Musk, people like Jeff Bezos. I mean, these are billionaires 10 times over. If the Democrats have that discussion, then they have a chance. And I think that I would, if I was advising them, I would tell them focus on the bread and butter issues. Break down that $3.5 trillion into things that affect the quality of lives of Americans. And I think you will find a tipping point of support if that becomes a discussion. Otherwise, they're going to lose, the optics, they've already lost the optics. That's a lot of money. I mean, that's a discussion. It's a lot of money. But it's a lot of money compared to what? The 20 trillion that we spent in Afghanistan? No. So I think the focus should be on the bread and butter issues. And if they do that, then they have a chance. If they don't, then they're in trouble.
Yeah,
Professor.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Could I just make a piggyback on what Osiro just mentioned there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So Chris, there's an interesting dynamic here. As much as Osiro's right, Democrats should focus on single issues, right, and make it about the issues rather than about the numbers. But I think there's another agenda. There's two other things that are going on with the budgeting process in Congress, and one of them obviously is the fact that because it's a budgeting, right, because we're talking about budgeting in Congress, the Democrats don't need the 2/3 majority, right? They don't need the 60 votes in the Senate. They don't need the super majority to pass the budget. They can pass it with a simple majority in the House and a simple majority in the Senate. But this, remember, is just because, Chris, this is a budgeting issue, right? Because it's a spending bill. On spending bills, the adjustments we've made historically in Congress, you can pass a bill with a simple majority, which again is why Democrats are desperate to pass these bills. But I think, to speak to Osiro's other point, I think the dilemma the Democrats are faced with here is if you pass the $3.5 trillion spending bill, what will automatically happen, because with the congressional budgeting process, what automatically happens is, you have what they call sequestering, budget sequestering. So automatically, Chris, if you spend above what's recommended by the budget, right, within the budgeting cycle, what automatically happens is whatever extra money there is that you wanted to spend on the other programs is automatically cut from programs you currently have in order to balance the budget. So there's another very complicated element there, right? It's not just so much about spending a larger amount of money, the record amount of money that we've ever spent. But remember, within the budget making process since the 80s, we've had, since Reagan, right? We've had these amendments to the budgeting process, Chris, yes, where if you overspend, automatically money will be already taken from current programs to balance the budget. And that's another problem. That's another problem. Tied to that is the question, Chris, of the debt ceiling, right? So obviously we have to raise the debt ceiling, which will raise the sequestering issues we're talking about, these automatic budget cuts. But we have to raise the debt ceiling because, as Osiro was mentioning, federal workers will not be paid. And the Republicans don't want to see that, right? And obviously we have to raise the federal debt ceiling because of America's credit rating. America has never defaulted on its debt, right? Just like our own personal debt. If you don't pay your bills, your FICO goes down, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We don't want our national credit to be injured. So we have to raise the debt limit automatically within the budgeting process. You'll have sequestering, which is basically automatic spending cuts to existing programs. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And I think the dynamic, Chris, here is Biden really needs to show leadership.
Yes. Yes.
He really needs to use a bully pulpit.
Absolutely.
To push the progressives, the AOCs. I know she's young, she's liberal, she's very idealistic, and that's good. But you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely.
And the beauty of our budget and our legislative process in this country, Chris, and also in Kenya with our parliament, is we hope that when Jubilee is debating with ODM, right? Jubilee at the end of when you pass a bill, Jubilee should not get 100% of what they want and ODM gets 0. The idea with the budgeting process and Congress in this country or even in Kenya is Jubilee should get half of what they want and ODM gets half of what they want. In our context, say the Republicans would get some of what they want,
yes,
and Democrats some of what they want, which ideally might be, maybe we might not spend 3.5 trillion, but we may spend maybe 1.5 or 1.8.
Yes.
So Democrats don't get all the spending they want, but Republicans also people like Senator Manchin, they can go back to West Virginia and say, I fought the Democrats, and instead of spending 3.5, we spent 1.6. And that way he'll get reelected. Because, Chris, remember, people like Manchin are the guys who are giving the Democrats a very slim majority in the Senate. If Manchin loses his seat, now you can see you start having problems because a Republican now comes into the office. Absolutely. And it really offsets the dynamic. So Biden really needs to take the bull by the horn. He needs to get leadership. He needs to get the Republican heads together and say, this is what we can give you in a compromise. And if you don't follow it, we're just going to vote over you because we have the majorities.
Absolutely.
And he should make that agenda with the public. Use the pulpit, use public relations, and tell the American people, this is what I want to do for you. And the Republicans are acting as obstruction.
And, that is one of my, I have that circled on my paper that, if this was, if this was Donald Trump, he would just basically bully his way through. And I think that has been one of the bane of existence of the Democratic Party, going back to 2008, when Obama had a supermajority in Senate and a pretty decent majority in the lower house. I mean, he tried to reach across the aisle, and I get that. I mean, I get the need for bipartisanship. I mean, because to your point, Professor, not everybody should nobody should get everything that they want. I get the need to come across as bipartisanship. But on the other hand, this is about basically taking a position and delivering on that position. Biden needs to basically tell his party that, what is your bottom line? And then with that in his back pocket, walk across to the Republicans and say, this is my bottom line. I am not going to budge because my party is unified behind this bottom line. And then to Professor's point, if the Republicans want to be the obstructionists that they have been every time a Democrat has been in the White House, then that is where leadership that is why you are basically elected to the executive, to lead and make this tough decision. And I love Joe Biden, I like his style, but on this particular issue, I just wish that he would basically figuratively, of course, knock some heads, knock some heads. I mean, this is why Trump was very successful, really. I mean, he got pretty much everything that he wanted, except the infrastructure bill, but he got everything that he wanted because he was willing to knock heads within his party and get on national TV or go on Fox and basically sell his agenda to his base. That is what Biden needs to do, because all the issues that are being discussed are very core democratic issues. But beyond that, there are issues that Americans across the divide hold dear. Again, whether it's healthcare, whether it's college, whether it's basically, childcare. These are very core issues that are bipartisan in nature, but they are also the base of the Democratic Party. Biden should basically take the bull by the horn and just, if worst case, ram it through.
Professor, one of the things the last few weeks, what has caught the eye of many people, especially people who look like you and me, and also the international communities, the images that came from the border when the world saw these white-looking guys on horsebacks whipping around black young men to round them to take them back to Haiti. Everybody knows that Haiti has had issues, especially natural and otherwise. Apart from that, Haiti is the neighbor of America in essence. But no, it was so open that the way the government treated these black people is very different from the way they treat the Latino community or any other community. Can you speak to that and what that says about the administration that we have right now? An administration that we all voted for overwhelmingly. My son is very angry. He told me point blank that Biden will never see his vote again.
Yes, so this, I think as my colleague Osiro has mentioned here, I think this is where the leadership is so important. Biden needs to stop playing Mr. Nice Guy and really needs to start pushing the democratic agenda, what the American people gave him the mandate to do.
Exactly, yes.
A big core area of that, Chris, is this question of immigration reform, which I must say, as an immigrant, having gone through the whole process, our immigration policy is really in tatters. There's really no consistent policy when it comes to immigration. Take, for example, this really confusing narrative. When Cubans come to Florida, immediately they set foot in Florida, yep, they are put in line for immigration, for their cases to be heard. They're put in line to get a green card. A Haitian coming from the Caribbean, same region, black Haitian, looking like you and me, comes to the show in Florida, or what we saw in Texas, and they're immediately cycled back and deported. And the images in Haiti were, excuse me, in Texas were particularly horrific, because right now we know in Haiti the kind of problems that they've been having in Haiti. They've been devastated by multiple earthquakes. The president there was, assassinated. His wife was critically injured, and they really don't have a functioning government right now. So I think it was really inhuman, Chris, when you imagine a lot of these Haitian people came and went all the way down to Brazil through the jungle and worked their way through the forest, through Panama, through Nicaragua, through El Salvador, Guatemala, all the way through Mexico, facing all that racism and abuse. And then to get to the border of US and Mexico, and they are put back on planes to go back to Haiti. I think this is really a call to action for this democratic constituency. There's a huge Haitian community in Florida. Wouldn't this be an ideal time when the Haitians can start organizing in their district, registering people to vote? Because in 2024, Florida will be a key congressional district. It will be a key state, right? We have a huge Haitian community in Florida. I think that's one of the areas of advocacy, right? I think Democrats recently tied to the immigration is also the issue of state legislatures messing up with the voting rolls, as is happening Osiro in Georgia right now.
Yep,
as
Texas.
Happening in Texas.
Yep.
The voting is related with the immigration, because the Republicans are really attempting to select who votes rather than the voters selecting those who are going to be voted for, right? So the electors are trying to, the elected are trying to decide who elects, whereas it's those who elect who are supposed to decide who's going to be elected. So I think that's another galvanizing point that the Democrats really need to push on when they're talking about immigration reform, rather than complaining about Republicans using state legislatures to change on issues like immigration, on issues like a minimum wage, on issues like debt. And
voting.
Then lastly, Chris, yes, and then lastly, immigration is a huge issue for the Kenyan community, out here. There's every other month you hear of how many Kenyans are dying, fundraisers to send people back home, people who are not in status, who went underground. Nobody heard of them until they get an unfortunate circumstance and they pass on. And then people are doing fundraisings to send the bodies back home. I really think this is a wake-up call around Biden, right? For Biden to show leadership. Because Chris, just in conclusion, let's not forget that if Biden fails on climate change, he'll be embarrassed at the Glasgow conference. He'll be embarrassed by his foreign challengers. We know recently China was, doing military drills around Taiwan, taunting the Taiwanese. They're taunting the United States because they know the United States protects Taiwan. In other words, a weak president domestically is open to big challenges by competitors abroad, be that Iran, be that China,
North Korea,
be that Russia,
North Korea.
Yep. And his voice in international conferences will just not be taken seriously because he will look to be weak at home. People will be asking, how will you pass climate change in Glasgow? How will you help the sub-Saharan Africa mitigate the effects of COVID and climate change when you cannot even get a budget passed in your own country? You cannot get immigration reform passed in your own country. This is very damaging for him if he doesn't get this budget through, because it dents his pride, it dents the image of the United States, and it's very difficult for him then to advance his foreign policy, within that framework.
And so just coming full circle, I mean, the issue is really how the Democrats position the arguments for the infrastructure bill and for the budget.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so that becomes the issue. And if they can have a discussion about, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I really believe that if they, and if you read across the different publications, whether it's Politico, whether it's LA Times, whether it's New York Times, if you go to Fox News, I mean, they are afraid to have a discussion about what the budget, the components of the budget are. And the reason why they're afraid is because all of a sudden, people are beginning to see which party has the interests of the general population at heart. And the fact that the plan is to tax the 1% who make billions of dollars, to tax them to offset to pay for some of these programs, but the Republicans are pushing against that. All of a sudden, the debate is framed around who has the interest of the general public at heart and who has the interest of the rich and powerful at heart. And if the Democrats can position, if Biden can compel the discussion to go along in that direction, then I think he's got a chance. And hopefully, if that were to happen, then all of a sudden you begin to see the importance of being, being collaborative in how you govern, because right now he looks weak. He hasn't appeared, or he hasn't used the bully pulpit to push the discussion, to shape the discussion. He's avoided the networks, he's avoided questions, and that's the narrative that is forming around this entire process. And that just has to change.
And you know, the question then becomes: is that a strategy, or that is just who Biden is? Anybody can go ahead.
Yeah, that's a $64,000 question. I think that by nature, Biden is a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. You know, he's steeped in the tradition of the Senate, where you meet in chubby conference rooms and hash out, you know, slap one another on the back and hash out and shake hands and say, okay, we're going to move forward. That's his, I mean, how long has he been in the Senate? 40, 50 years? So that's who he is. He's very, he's an institutionalist. But I think so he's an institutionalist where in an institution that has changed markedly. So back in the good old days, you know, you could have those handshake deals because the Senate was homogenous. Right now, you have all these different personalities with different agendas who don't care about tradition, who don't care about the institution. They just want what they want. So Biden needs to change tact, because his way of, you know, sticking to the protocol and to the format of, you know, making deals behind the scene is not working.
Yeah, so, Chris, and Chris, if I could add to that, and I think Afghanistan was a big hit on Biden, a huge hit on his, you know, his opinion polling rating.
Yes.
And it was a huge hit for American allies like Kenya, right? Because America cut and run in Afghanistan very much like America cut and run in Vietnam. It was deja vu all over again. We saw these chaotic scenes, you know, in Saigon in 1975. And now we're seeing people clinging on C-150 transport planes, desperate to get out of the country. You know, it was such a horrendous image, with no planning, complete and absolute chaos. Now, why do I say that? Because allies of the United States, for example, like Kenya, this month, Kenya took over the leadership of the Security Council. We're going to be on the Security Council as a non-permanent member for 2 years. But in the month of October, we are the president of the Security Council. So Kenya has a big role to play in terms of the international dynamics and creating this multilateral framework. But I say Biden really needs to up his game, because partners like Kenya, you know, who have been strong allies of the United States, then really start to question whether, if the United States pulls out of Afghanistan, is Biden really committed to multilateralism to replace the unilateralism of Trump's America First? Is Biden going to stand with Kenya in the war on terror against, say, Al-Shabaab in Somalia? Or is America going to pull out and, you know, have Kenya have to face that challenge, Ethiopia have to face that challenge by themselves? So there's a lot of other dynamics which come into play based just on this domestic politics that is playing out, not only in terms of how the money will be spent and whether Biden can pass the budget, but what those images in foreign policy of America cutting and running in Afghanistan, what does that say to America's allies in Africa? Will America be there to support its allies in some of these very difficult spaces? For example, around the war on terror or the post-COVID recovery.
Osiro, as we wind up.
Yes. I think, you know, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think this is an opportunity for Biden to show leadership and corral his Democratic Party towards issues that they've discussed for as long as I've been following the American politics. I also, and while I appreciate the need to work across the aisle, you know, I also appreciate the fact that, you know, leadership is about making, especially at Biden's level, is about making tough choices. He was elected, like the professor said, he was elected with a mandate. I mean, he got over 81 million votes. that is unheard of. So if he misses the opportunity to lead the Democratic Party and the country towards issues that have been the bread and butter issues of the Democratic Party and a large swath of the American population, it would be devastating, not only for the Democratic Party in general, but also for the country, because all of a sudden, all the issues related to a failed administration, all the issues related to the perception of a weak American president come to the forefront. And if that happens, then the midterms are going to look ugly, and he is going to be a lame duck president, 2 years into his presidency, and that would not be good.
Awesome. Viewers, that has been Professor Monda, a lecturer at City University in New York, and also Washington Osiro. Osiro is an author, an intellectual who understands these issues. So he lives in California, but he joined us from Atlanta, Georgia. He's on some mission there. He's working from there now, and we've been discussing the Biden agenda going into the 2022 midterms and also the 2024 elections. Trump is waiting in the wings. He's muddying the waters, so to speak. So it's going to be very interesting. American politics is going to be very interesting. Again, and we do this because, like Osiro said, when America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold.